Sanatan Dharma is widely taught today as the world's oldest living, unified religion, boasting an estimated 900 million adherents. Modern definitions rely on a cohesive set of pillars. These include the law of Dharma, the law of karma, the authority of the Vedas, and the four ashramas. Yet historical sociology presents a paradox. While the Sanskrit terminology and the scriptures themselves are thousands of years old, this rigid, monolithic presentation is a modern creation. By deconstructing the history of Sanatan Dharma, we can observe how an ancient, highly decentralized network of philosophies was engineered into a modern political identity. Mapping this evolution exposes the exact mechanisms modern states use to weave religious orthodoxy into national identity and statecraft. In its classical origins, Sanatan Dharma did not describe a sectarian religion. The term referred to an overarching cosmic and moral order known as Rita. We see attempts to codify cosmic principles in early texts, like this Rig Veda manuscript detailing hymns to universal deities. But these texts prescribed an idealized moral order and a theoretical ritual hierarchy. They did not reflect a unified religious practice on the ground. Across the Indian subcontinent, classical epistemology was profoundly pluralistic. There was no single doctrinal truth and no centralized administration governing the various sects. Practice grew organically and adaptively across the terrain. Goddess worship in Tamil Nadu, bhakti poetry in Maharashtra, and tantric rituals in Assam operated on localized theologies that frequently bypassed Brahmanical orthodoxy entirely. The sheer diversity of the historical record contradicts the modern assumption of a monolithic pan-Indian faith. This decentralized network faced a systemic disruption in the 19th century. Colonial pressures forced these disparate nodes to consolidate into a defensive, unified mold. The catalyst was British colonial administration and new educational policies, championed by figures like Thomas Babington Macaulay, which explicitly sought to overwrite indigenous knowledge systems. Looking at this colonial-era school photograph, the formalized Western system is taking hold. Here, colonial administrators aggressively characterized traditional Hinduism as superstitious and irrational. By officially banning traditional Sanskrit education and shutting down gurukuls, the state severed populations from their localized roots. In response, 19th-century Indian reformers engineered what sociologists call neo-Hinduism. They synthesized Advaitic non-dualism with Western liberalism to prove that India possessed a civilizational parity with Europe. Figures like Swami Vivekananda presented a highly rationalized, spiritually elastic version of the faith to global audiences. To achieve this unified front, reformers made strategic editorial choices. They elevated specific texts, like the Bhagavad Gita, into a central canon, while actively marginalizing Adivasi, Dalit, and local folk practices to project a purified identity. Domestically, this cohesion required physical mobilization. Leaders like Bal Gangadhar Tilak used massive public festivals to fuse disparate, caste-bound populations into a single imagined national community. This middle layer of history was a strategic, discursive project. To survive colonial erasure, reformers rehabilitated Sanatan Dharma from an esoteric philosophy into an exportable, modern civilizational identity. In post-liberalization India, this neo-Hindu mold has been repurposed. Contemporary political organizations have seized this unified structure to assert cultural hegemony and political control. The ideological focus shifted from spiritual defense to civilizational sovereignty and territorial patriotism, driven by groups like the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, or RSS. Here, metaphysical unity is translated directly into corporeal regimentation. Spirituality becomes an everyday physical discipline and political habitus. This laid the groundwork for Hindutva, an ideology that deploys the language of Sanatan Dharma as an exclusionary grammar of national belonging, privileging specific subjective identities while repositioning minorities as cultural outsiders. The mechanics of this shift are embedded in state institutions. Textbook committees actively revise history curriculums to excise mentions of caste atrocities, recoding historical social inequality as a divine cosmic order. This political project requires physical spectacle. The Ayodhya movement, culminating in crowds converging on the Babri Masjid domes, fused mass devotion with campaigns for historical restitution. These movements re-sacralized territorial space, legitimizing spectacular violence as ritual restoration. Today, modern electoral politics relies on this exact imagery to conflate constitutional citizenship with allegiance to this specific version of Sanatan Dharma. Political leaders performing religious foundation ceremonies effectively fuse statecraft with mythology. In this environment, opposing majoritarian legislation constitutes the profanation of an eternal cultural mandate. This contemporary political reinvention successfully compressed a vast pluralistic philosophy into a monolithic standard, one that actively marginalizes non-Hindu communities and dissenting voices within the tradition. This three-layered timeline shows exactly how the social function of Sanatan Dharma was rebuilt across three distinct eras. Historian Eric Hobsbawm defined the invented tradition as a set of practices governed by accepted rules that seek to inculcate values implying a continuity with a suitable historical past. Research into the political reinvention of Hinduism clarifies that the ancient texts and original practices are historically valid. However, the modern packaging of these practices into a singular, state-aligned identity utilizes scriptural antiquity to legitimize modern political requirements. The sociological costs of this homogenizing discourse are steep. It forces marginalized groups to assimilate into upper caste norms for basic social acceptance, and it securitizes minority identities through legislative surveillance. To accurately analyze global politics and protect pluralistic citizenship, we must recognize the difference between an eternal spiritual concept and one that has been strategically rebuilt to consolidate modern state power.